Okay, let's move on to comp 5, anticipation. So we'll double click that comp to open it. And you can see I have 3 text layers here. Three instances of the word anticipation. This is because I want to show you 3 different methods of animating anticipation. But first let me describe what anticipation is. Basically, you can think of every action as having 3 parts. You've got the anticipation, the action itself, and the follow-through. The anticipation is the build-up to the action, or you could think of it as the wind-up. You have the action, and then you have the follow-through, which is the termination of the action. We'll talk about that more when we get to follow-through. But you can think of anticipation as the wind-up to the action. A good example I like to use is, before you can jump a creek, you've got to crouch down in order to leap up. In order to throw a punch, you've got to pull your hand back first. The anticipation is the wind-up. Anticipation always occurs in the opposite direction of the action. So let me go ahead and demonstrate, and it will be more clear. So let's start with I'm going to get these layers in order. Okay, so let's start with layer 1, which is the first word. We're going to have this text sitting there for a couple seconds, and then it's going to animate off the screen. So I'm going to hit P for position, and we'll go forward to 1 second. Click the stopwatch, so it's just going to sit there in place for a second. And then I just went forward by 15 frames, so now I'm at frame 1 second and 15 frames, and we're gonna slide the text off the screen. Let's render a RAM preview. So text is sitting there, and then it moves off screen. It does what we want it to do, but it's a little bit dry. There is no anticipation. So let's add some anticipation in there, and you'll see just how much kind of personality and life it injects into this simple piece of text. So the way anticipation works is before we have it move to the right, we should have it give a little push back to the left, like a little wind up to shooting off the screen right. So here's how we want to create our anticipation. So our first keyframe is where the text begins moving. Let's go forward 4 frames, and we'll have the text move backwards a little bit. So you can see here's the first keyframe. Our second keyframe is going to have it do a little backwards jog, and then the third keyframe, it shoots off the screen. So now you can see it kind of goes backwards before it goes forwards. It's a little bit too much, and what's causing that, if we zoom in here, I'm going to zoom in here, you can see here's the keyframe that it jogs back to, but notice our motion path, and you see the little dots on the motion path, actually projects back further than this keyframe. This is because After Effects is trying to create that nice smooth auto Bezier curve between the keyframes that you set, but we're setting all these keyframes in a straight line, so it's given After Effects a little bit of trouble there. So here's how we fix that. Since our text is moving in a straight line, we're not really doing any spatial interpolation here. So let's select all 3 of our keyframes, right click on them, and go to Keyframe Interpolation. And under Keyframe Interpolation, you can see our interpolation is broken into 2 categories: temporal interpolation, which is the timing of the layer, and spatial interpolation, which is how, the spatial, how it moves on the comp window. And you can see it's defaulting to continuous Bezier, which is typically what we want. But in this case, we want to change that to linear and hit OK. Now when we zoom in, we can see it got rid of that little part of the motion path that shot back past our leftmost keyframe. So now our layer is just going to go back to the keyframe that we set and then move forward. And I think the flying off the screen's a little bit too fast, so let's drag that keyframe down some. And let's select these second two keyframes. Actually, let's select all three of the keyframes and apply easy ease. And there you have it. So we've added a little anticipation to our text, that little slight move to the left before it jets off to the right. And again, as always, if we turn on motion blur, that will smooth that out a lot. Now I think we could probably even give the anticipation an extra frame or so. You'll find that when you're animating, trying to get convincing looking motion, that there's a lot of tweaking. You'll watch it preview for a while, looking for problems with it, and then you'll tweak, render another RAM preview. Okay, so this is a very simple example of anticipation. We just have it kind of move backwards in the opposite direction and then shoot off the screen. Now we're going to select text layer 2, and I'm going to show you another way. So bear in mind, be creative for how you do this. You know, we could kind of take it to the next level and exaggerate it a little bit by having the text lean backwards, almost the way a pitcher would lean backwards before he pitches the ball forward. So we can do that with the if you go to Effect, Distort, Transform. Look over here in the effects control palette. You see all these different transform parameters that we in this transform effect, and we have a skew, which lets us skew the layer. You can see it's not skewing in the right direction though, so we need to change the skew axis to 90 degrees. And now when we skew it, there we go. Now it's leaning correctly. So we can have it lean back like this before it shoots off the screen. So go ahead and click the stopwatch for skew to animate that. And I'll go forward a few frames. And we'll have the skew cause the text to kind of lean back some. Then I'll go forward another 5 frames or so, and we'll have the text kind of throw itself forward. And I think I want the wind up to be a little bit slower, so it's kind of a slow wind up and then it quickly throws itself forward. So let's give a little bit more time between those first couple of keyframes. So it's going to lean back and then throw itself forward. So that's where we want to set our first position keyframe. And then I'll go forward. Let's try maybe 15 frames. Animate the layer off the screen. Add easy ease to our skew keyframes. And again, let's turn on motion blur. And we could try adding an ease out to that first position keyframe, but that might make it start too slow. Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, so that's another way to use some anticipation. And it really gives that piece of text some life. You know, it feels like it's propelling itself. And then the last example here is going to use scale. So basically we could have it compress back and then spring forward out of frame. So we're going to want to pull up scale and position. Click the stopwatch for scale, and we'll go forward, let's say 5 frames. Turn off the little link between our scale properties, and this time we want it to compress on the x-axis, but I think I want the A to stay stationary and have this side of the letter kind of compress backwards like a spring coiling up. And by default it's compressing from both sides because our anchor point is in the middle, right? So let's undo, and I'm going to go to the paragraph. If you don't see the paragraph window open, we can go up to Window, Paragraph, and I will click Left Justified. Now that means we have to reposition our text here, but now if we go forward 5 frames, now you can see how it's scaling towards the A. So the A is, the left edge of the A feels kind of locked in place. So let's try 80, and so that means we'll expand the other by 120. So you can see how it feels like it's kind of compressing, and then it's going to spring forward. So this time we'll kind of over exaggerate in the other direction. So it compresses and then springs forward. So as it springs forward, it should start to move forward. So we'll click our stopwatch for position. Go forward 10 frames. And move our text off screen. We'll ease that first position keyframe. And I think we'll give it a little bit more time for the recoil. We'll ease these first 2 keyframes of the scale. And I'm just going to solo this layer so we're not distracted by the other 2 layers while we watch it animate. Yeah, I think I kind of dig that. It's kind of cool the way it like squashes, compresses down before it springs out in the other direction. Let's turn on motion blur again, of course. Okay, now let's look at all 3 of them. And I'll kind of offset all our keyframes here in time, so first one will shoot off, then the next, and then the third. Cool. So 3 different ways to inject some anticipation into this text animation.